My parents left me $28 million, I said, voice steady, even though my palms were damp under the table. Across from me, my mother-in-law narrowed her eyes, lips curling like she had been waiting for this exact confession. Then she leaned forward, chin raised, and said, word for word, "Half of that belongs to this family. You should give it to us." For a split second, the dining room fell silent. Even the air conditioner's low hum seemed to pause. I froze. My fork hovered above my plate like I had forgotten how to move. Inside, my stomach twisted as if someone had slammed a door right in my gut. But outside, I smiled faintly, turned my head toward her, and said the one word that sliced through the silence. Number. The word wasn't loud. I didn't shout, but it hit the table like a glass shattering on tile. Her smile faltered, just a fraction, like she hadn't calculated that response. My husband coughed into his napkin, pretending to be distracted. His sister shifted in her chair, suddenly fascinated by her salad. And me? I sat there, my heartbeat ricocheting against my ribs, pretending that my whole body wasn't trembling under the weight of what just happened. You might think moments like that come with thunder, with raised voices, with someone flipping a table. But no. Sometimes the sharpest battles are fought in whispers, in one-syllable refusals. And sometimes the refusal is louder than a scream. Let me rewind. It was a Saturday night in late spring, the kind of evening when the air outside is still sticky from the day, and everyone pretends the cool breeze through open windows is enough to replace actual air conditioning. We were having family dinner at my in-laws' house. Her house, really. She'd insisted for weeks. My husband said it would be just casual, right. That word does a lot of heavy lifting in my family. The table was set like she was auditioning for a home magazine spread. Polished silverware, plates she only brought out when guests were over, candles burning low enough to look expensive but high enough to catch the light in her crystal glasses. She liked the performance of elegance more than the comfort of it. I could smell roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, and under all of that, the faint sharpness of bleach, because God forbid anyone notice a speck of dust on her counters. We were mid-meal when she dropped her bomb. No build-up, no easing into it, just one straight, cutting demand. Half of that belongs to this family. My body reacted before my brain did. First came the heat crawling up my neck, then the sudden awareness of every eye in the room sliding toward me. It was like being put on trial without warning, the jury already glaring, the verdict already sealed. I could have laughed it off. I could have excused myself, gone to the bathroom, splashed water on my face until the burn in my chest cooled down. But something in me snapped. Or maybe it didn't snap. Maybe it clicked into place. Because here's the truth. She had been training me for this moment for years. I remembered every snide remark, every joke that wasn't a joke. The way she'd once told me, on my own wedding day, "You look fine. Don't outshine your sister-in-law." The way she'd asked me to pay for a new water heater because, in her words, "You're part of this household now, and you have a stable job." The way she rolled her eyes whenever I tried to host, like I was a toddler playing at being an adult. This demand, this "give us half of 28 million," it wasn't a shock. It was just the loudest version of the same song she'd been humming for years. And still it knocked the air out of me. I stared at my plate for a beat too long, trying to slow my pulse. The mashed potatoes blurred in front of me, the steam rising like smoke from a building that had already burned down. My husband's hand twitched on the table, as if he wanted to reach for mine, but didn't. He never did in these moments. He had learned the art of surviving his mother's storms by ducking down and letting them pass over. But me? I was done ducking, so I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Number." That was it, one syllable. But it was heavier than the entire meal. The muscles in her jaw tightened. She adjusted her napkin with unnecessary precision. I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head, recalibrating. She was not used to someone telling her no. Not me, not anyone. And I sat there, outwardly calm, inwardly vibrating, replaying that single word in my head like a secret anthem. I didn't know it yet, but that no was just the opening act. Because saying no to a woman like my mother-in-law doesn't end the conversation. It starts a war. You might think her demand at that dinner table came out of nowhere, like lightning splitting the sky without warning. But no, it was years in the making. Looking back, I can trace the exact breadcrumbs she left, every small test of how far she could push me. And for years, I let her. The first breadcrumb was small, almost laughable now. It was the day after our wedding. My husband and I had barely unpacked from the honeymoon when she knocked on our apartment door carrying a stack of envelopes. She sat on our couch like it was her own and handed me one, smiling as if she was giving me a gift. Inside was a receipt for the floral arrangements from the wedding. "You make good money," she said casually. "It's only fair you contribute." Contribute. That was her favorite word. But what she meant was cover. I paid it, because arguing over roses and lilies felt petty. I told myself it was just a one-time thing, but of course, it wasn't. The next breadcrumb was when her car broke down. She called me, not her son. "The mechanic says it's going to be $1,200. She sighed dramatically. "You know how unreliable my pension is. Can you help?" She didn't even ask him. Just me. And when I hesitated, she added the line that had become her signature weapon, "Family helps family." So I wrote the check. And then I sat in my car afterward, staring at the steering wheel, realizing she had skipped her own child and gone straight to me, like I was some kind of family ATM with no withdrawal limit. But I stayed quiet. I wanted peace. I told myself helping her would earn respect. That maybe, just maybe, she'd stop seeing me as an outsider. Spoiler, it didn't. By the time I was pregnant, the breadcrumbs had turned into boulders. I remember standing in her kitchen, hands on my swollen stomach, when she leaned over and said with that syrupy sweet tone, "You're just a guest in this family until you give us a grandson. Not a child, not love, a grandson." As if my value was a ticket I hadn't yet punched. I laughed it off in the moment, because I was tired and hormonal, and didn't want to fight. But later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and realized how deeply that comment had cut. She had a way of making cruelty sound like tradition. And my husband? He was used to it. He'd grown up under her weather system, 1 minute sunshine, the next a storm, and he learned to carry an umbrella everywhere. He'd tell me, "That's just how she is," as if that excused anything. But I wasn't raised that way. My parents, the same ones who left me that fortune, taught me that love doesn't come with an invoice. Still, I stayed silent. Because you don't want to be the wife who causes friction. You don't want to be the reason family dinners end early. You tell yourself endurance equals strength. Until the inheritance changed everything. The day the lawyer called me, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the number he read out. $28 million. I remember my hands shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. It wasn't just money. It was every sacrifice my parents had made, wrapped into one final act of protection. It was college tuition they skipped paying for themselves so they could save for me. It was retirement they postponed so I wouldn't struggle. It was their entire lives condensed into a figure so large it barely felt real. And almost immediately she found out. News travels fast in families, especially when it smells like money. She didn't congratulate me, didn't offer condolences about the parents I'd just buried. The first words out of her mouth over Sunday lunch were, "That money should be shared. We're family." Family. That word again, twisted until it was unrecognizable. The truth is, she never saw me as family. Not when she excluded me from group photos. Not when she corrected how I seasoned chicken at Thanksgiving. Not when she told people my job was cute, but not serious. The only time I became family was when she saw dollar signs. So when she said half, at that dinner table weeks later, it wasn't random. It was the crescendo of every little test, every demand I had caved to before. And my refusal? That one word? It wasn't just about the 28 million. It was about years of swallowing insults, of paying dues to a club that never wanted me as a member. Sitting there, fork still in my hand, I realized she wasn't shocked by my inheritance. She was shocked that I had finally drawn a line. I didn't know how far she'd go after that. But I did know one thing. The war had already started, and this time I wasn't walking away. The silence after my refusal stretched longer than it should have, like someone had hit pause on the entire room. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, each second dragging against my nerves. My mother-in-law blinked once, twice, then leaned back in her chair with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said, drawing out the word like she was savoring it, "I suppose generosity doesn't run in your side of the family." I didn't flinch. I just set my fork down, carefully, quietly, the way you might set down a loaded weapon you weren't planning to fire. Not yet. Her sister, Aunt Marianne, shifted uncomfortably and mumbled something about the weather. My father-in-law cleared his throat but didn't speak. My husband stared at his plate, carving at his chicken breast like it had personally offended him. And the rest of the table, they watched. They always watched. My mother-in-law was the queen, and I was the intruder who had just dared to tell her no in her own castle. She wasn't done. Of course she wasn't. "You know," she continued, her tone soft but sharp, "we have all sacrificed for this family. I raised your husband on my own while his father worked long hours. I helped with your wedding, with your first apartment. You owe us, at least a little." There it was, the invoice disguised as nostalgia. I tilted my head slightly, like I was considering her words, but inside I was boiling. My parents had worked their entire lives for that money. My parents had left it to me, not her. And yet here she was, rewriting history so she could slip her name onto the will retroactively. I took a slow breath. "You didn't pay for our wedding," I said evenly. "I did, with my savings. You asked me to cover the flowers, remember? You called it contributing." Her smile twitched. "And that first apartment?" I went on, voice steady, eyes locked on hers. "You told us to pay you rent to help with bills, even though the place was already paid off. Do you want me to keep going, or is that enough of a reminder?" The room froze. Forks stopped midair. My husband's knife slipped against his plate with a screech. For once, she didn't have a rehearsed response. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. I could see the calculation in her eyes. Do I deny? Do I pivot? Do I attack harder? She chose attack. "You ungrateful girl," she snapped, the sweetness in her voice cracking clean in half. "Everything you have is because of us. Without this family, you'd be nothing." My chest tightened, not with fear, but with something sharper. I leaned forward just slightly, enough that my voice didn't have to rise above a calm, measured tone. "Everything I have," I said, "is because of my parents. Not you, not this family. Them. They worked, they saved, they sacrificed, and they left it to me. So no, you don't get half. You don't get a dime. You don't even get the courtesy of pretending it was ever yours." Her face turned a shade of red I had only ever seen once before when the grocery store ran out of her favorite wine before Thanksgiving. But this wasn't frustration. This was humiliation. The table held its breath. Finally, she laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. "Do you hear her?" she said to the others, scanning the faces around the table. "This is what we welcomed into our family. A selfish, spoiled woman who thinks money makes her better than the rest of us." No one responded. Not even her loyal sister. And that was when I realized I had already won. Because for years, they had let her speak for everyone. They had nodded, agreed, laughed on cue. But now, no one rushed to her defense. They just stared at their plates, at their drinks, anywhere but at her. I leaned back, slow and deliberate, and let the silence do the rest. When I finally spoke again, my voice was almost gentle. "You can call me selfish if it helps you sleep. But let's be clear. This money isn't yours. It never was. And if you ever try to come for it again, you'll find out just how quickly I can make sure you're nowhere near my life." Her jaw clenched. My husband looked up finally, eyes wide, like even he hadn't expected me to go that far. But I had to. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about drawing a line so deep in the sand that not even her storms could wash it away. She stood abruptly, chair scraping hard against the floor. "Dinner's over," she hissed, storming out of the room. And maybe it was. Maybe the whole idea of family dinners was over too. But as I sat there, calm, steady, my heart still pounding in my chest, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was the first time she had ever been told no, and the last time I would ever let her forget it. When she stormed out of the dining room, the sound of her heels on the hardwood echoed like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. The rest of us sat in the silence she left behind, forks idle, glasses sweating in the warm air. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe she would retreat upstairs, slam a door, and sulk until everyone quietly packed up and left. But of course, she came back. 2 minutes later, she reappeared, red-faced, holding a stack of envelopes in one hand and a wine glass in the other. Her smile was gone. What replaced it was something darker, more desperate. "If you won't share willingly," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass, "then maybe you should remember everything this family has done for you." She tossed the envelopes onto the table, where they fanned out like playing cards. Old receipts, copies of checks I'd written, notes she'd kept, evidence of every single thing she had ever asked me to contribute to. It hit me then she'd been keeping score for years. Every flower bill, every car repair, every favor, not as memories of help, but as ammunition for a day like this. I picked one up. It was the floral invoice from my wedding. I traced the numbers with my finger and laughed under my breath. "You kept this?" I asked, voice steady, almost amused. Her eyes flashed. "Proof," she snapped. "Proof that you owe us. Proof that you wouldn't even be here without me." My husband shifted uncomfortably, looking between us. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally said, "Mom, maybe this isn't the time." "Quiet," she barked, slamming her wine glass on the table so hard a crack split down the side. Red wine bled onto the white tablecloth like an accusation. "You don't get to tell me when to speak in my own house." The room stiffened. My sister-in-law looked ready to cry. Aunt Marianne dabbed nervously at the spilled wine with her napkin, like blotting the stain could erase the tension too. I leaned back in my chair, deliberately calm, letting her words hang in the air. Then I placed the receipt back on the stack and slid it across the table toward her. "You're right," I said softly. "You did keep score. And do you know what that tells me? That every time you said family helps family, you didn't mean it. You meant me. You meant my wallet. That's not family. That's a loan shark in pearls." The words landed harder than I expected. Her face twisted, part fury, part disbelief, like no one had ever dared name her game before. "You think you're better than us because of that money," she spat, "because of your parents. But let me tell you something, you'll end up alone. Money doesn't love you back. Family does." I let the silence stretch, then tilted my head. "If this is what you call love," I said, gesturing at the receipts, the broken glass, the fear in everyone else's eyes, "then I'll take being alone." That was when the yelling started. She launched into a tirade, half accusations, half sob story. How she'd struggled as a single mom. How no one ever appreciated her sacrifices. How she was the backbone of this family. The words spilled out rapid fire, punctuated by slamming hands on the table, by pointing fingers, by wild gestures that knocked over another glass of wine. But here's the thing. The louder she got, the calmer I became, because I could see it, really see it, the cracks in her power. For years she had ruled this family with guilt and manipulation, but now, in this moment, she looked less like a queen and more like a cornered gambler doubling down on a bad hand. Around the table, others were seeing it too. Aunt Marianne stopped trying to mop up the wine. My sister-in-law finally looked up, eyes wide, no longer pretending to be invisible. Even my father-in-law, who had spent most of dinner staring at his plate, was watching her with something like disappointment. She screamed, "This is betrayal." I folded my napkin slowly, placed it beside my plate, and said, "Number, this is boundaries." That single word boundaries seemed to stun the room almost as much as my original no. It wasn't loud, but it was final. She froze, chest heaving, eyes locked on me. And for the first time all evening, she had no immediate comeback. Just silence, thick and heavy, pressing down on all of us. Finally, she grabbed the stack of envelopes, crumpled them in her hand, and stormed out again. This time, the slam of her heels was joined by the slam of a door upstairs. The room exhaled all at once. My husband looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. My sister-in-law whispered, I've never seen anyone stand up to her like that. And I just sat there, calm, steady, my pulse still racing beneath the surface, knowing that the war wasn't over, but for the first time, the battlefield wasn't hers alone. The moment her bedroom door slammed upstairs, the dining room seemed to collapse into itself. The candle flames flickered in the sudden draft. The wine stains spread silently across the tablecloth, and the only sound was the faint clink of my father-in-law setting down his fork. It was the sound of defeat. Not mine, hers. No one moved for a while. My sister-in-law stared at me as though she'd just witnessed someone jump off a burning building and land on their feet. Aunt Marianne kept dabbing at the table, but her movements were slow now, mechanical, as though she knew it didn't matter anymore. Finally, my husband broke the silence. "You shouldn't have pushed her like that," he said quietly, his voice tight, his eyes still fixed on the table. I turned to him, calm but firm. "I didn't push her. I just stopped letting her push me." He flinched but didn't argue, because deep down he knew it was true. We finished the rest of the meal in awkward silence, each bite mechanical, each sip forced. By the time dessert came out, some pie she had probably baked, just to stage another picture-perfect family night, no one touched it. The plate sat untouched, the ice cream melting into pale puddles. I was the first to stand. I placed my napkin neatly on the table and said, "Thank you for dinner." No sarcasm, no venom. Just polite finality. The others followed quickly. My sister-in-law grabbed her purse, muttered something about an early morning. Aunt Marianne pretended she had a phone call waiting. Even my father-in-law, usually loyal to his wife to a fault, excused himself with a heavy sigh. It was like the entire house exhaled with me, but the peace didn't last. The next morning, she came to my house. I heard the knock at 9 a.m., sharp, angry, insistent. I opened the door to find her standing there, no makeup, hair pulled back tight, holding the same stack of envelopes she'd waved around the night before. Her eyes were red, but not from tears, from rage. "We need to talk," she said flatly, pushing past me into the living room before I could even answer. I followed, closing the door behind me. My husband trailed in her wake, silent, looking exhausted. She dropped the envelopes on my coffee table and jabbed a finger at me. "You embarrassed me in front of my family. You humiliated me. That money is tearing us apart, and it's your fault." I stayed standing, arms crossed. "No," I said. "That money didn't tear us apart. Your greed did." Her nostrils flared. "You dare call me greedy after everything I've done for you?" I took a step closer, lowering my voice so each word cut sharper. "You've never done anything for me without keeping score. You've never treated me as family unless it benefited you. And last night? That wasn't about love or unity. That was about control. And I'm done letting you control me." For a second, I thought she might actually slap me. Her hand twitched, her jaw clenched, but then she just laughed a hollow, bitter sound. "You'll regret this," she said. "When everyone sides with me, when you're left out, when you realize family means more than money, you'll come crawling back." I shook my head slowly. "Number. What I'll regret is every time I let you speak to me like this and stayed silent. That ends now." The words seemed to land harder than I expected. She froze, lips parted, eyes narrowing. And then, in a move that felt almost desperate, she grabbed the envelopes again, stuffed them into her bag, and stormed out the front door. My husband sank onto the couch with his head in his hands. "You don't understand," he murmured. "She won't let this go." I sat beside him, my voice steady. "Then she's about to learn what happens when I don't let go either." Because the truth was, last night hadn't just been a dinner. It had been a declaration. And this morning wasn't just a confrontation. It was a warning. She thought she had won by keeping score. She thought she had leverage. But she didn't realize I had the one thing she couldn't touch: my resolve. And as I sat there, staring at the door she had just slammed behind her, I knew this battle wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The house was quiet after she left. Too quiet. My husband sat on the couch, with his face buried in his hands, as though if he stayed there long enough, the walls would erase what had just happened. I stayed standing, staring at the door she had slammed only minutes earlier. The air still vibrated from her presence, like the echo of a storm that had passed but promised to circle back. For the rest of that day, we didn't speak much. He paced the kitchen, called his sister once, hung up after a few words. I went through the motions, laundry, dishes, answering work emails, but my mind replayed every moment at that dining table, every accusation she hurled in my living room. The receipts, the threats, the way she clutched them like weapons. By evening, I realized something. She hadn't come here to talk. She had come here to scare me, to break me down until I caved. That was her playbook. Always push, guilt, demand, repeat. But this time, it didn't work. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, looking out at the quiet street. It was almost peaceful, except for the buzzing in my head. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about money anymore. It never really was. The $28 million was just the spark. What she wanted was power, and she had lost it the second I said no. And once someone like her loses power, they scramble to get it back. Over the next week, the ripple effects began. Phone calls I didn't answer. Text messages I ignored. A cousin tagging me in a cryptic post online about selfish relatives. Every move was the same script, try to shame me into compliance. But instead of shrinking, I grew calmer. Because with every attempt, she only proved me right. One evening, I sat my husband down and said, "This can't continue. We either set boundaries or we drown." He looked at me, tired, torn between loyalty and exhaustion. For once, he didn't argue. He just nodded. And in that small nod, I saw the beginning of something new. Maybe not independence, not yet, but at least acknowledgement. The following Sunday, we skipped family dinner. Instead, I cooked at home. Just the two of us. The silence was heavy, but it was ours. No receipts waved in my face. No demands disguised as tradition. Just a quiet meal that felt, for the first time in a long time, like choice. But I knew the war wasn't over. She would try again. She always did. So I made myself a promise that night. The next time she showed up with her accusations, I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't defend. I'd simply remind her of one thing, that love isn't measured in invoices, and family doesn't keep score. Because the truth is, money comes and goes. Respect doesn't, and I'd rather stand alone with respect than surrounded by people who see me as nothing more than a bank account. Looking back, maybe that was the lesson my parents left me, along with the inheritance. Not just financial security, but the reminder that I deserve to live without fear of being drained dry by someone else's entitlement. They had worked too hard for me to waste it on silence. So if you're listening, and you've ever been in a room where someone tried to shrink you, tried to take what was yours, remember this. You don't owe anyone your peace just to keep them comfortable. You don't owe anyone your silence just to keep the dinner table calm. Boundaries aren't betrayal, they're survival. As for my mother-in-law, maybe she'll never understand. Maybe she'll cling to her receipts until the ink fades, convinced the world owes her something more. Or maybe, one day, she'll realize that the only thing she really lost wasn't money at all. It was me. And honestly, I don't know if she'll ever get me back. What I do know is this. Saying no was the first real yes I'd given myself in years. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been told you were selfish for protecting yourself, or if you've ever been pressured into giving until there was nothing left, then stick around. There are more stories like this, more moments of quiet rebellion that change everything. Because sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought in courtrooms or headlines. They're fought at family dinner tables, with nothing more than a fork, a napkin, and the courage to say one small word. Number. And trust me, that word can change everything. So if you want to hear what happened next, if you want to follow the rest of this journey, don't just listen and walk away. Join me. Hit subscribe, stay with me, and let's face the next chapter together, because something tells me this story isn't over yet.